Howdy, historians. Welcome to Unit 1 in the Discovery Project Landmark Moments in American History. Today we're going to be looking at colonial America. So this will be your introduction to the topic. This will give you the necessary background information you need when you are analyzing documents throughout the rest of this week, throughout the rest of this unit. So background with a little bit of information to help you understand the topic. This is what we call the context, right? If any of you guys have ever seen the movie Star Wars, in the beginning of all the Star Wars, they scroll some text up the screen to tell you what's been going on. That's giving you the context. Context is a skill that we're going to work on a lot in this class. So I'm going to give you the historical context you need right now to be able to understand the documents that we're going to analyze later about colonial America. So let's hop right into it. The first thing we actually need to do in talking about colonial America is we need to talk about the Spanish a little bit. So the Spanish come over. Most of us know the little rhyme. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and he stumbles upon the Bahamas. He stumbles upon an entirely new continent that really most of the world didn't know about up to this point, that Europeans outside of the Vikings definitely didn't know about. And he puts in this massive chain effect of events that completely changes the course of world history. And Columbus is sailing for the Spanish. So the Spanish are able to eventually build just an absolutely massive empire in the Americas. So they're the first to explore. They're also the first to colonize. They're going to primarily be colonizing Central and South America. So in South America, they're going to overtake the Inca in Peru and find just massive amounts of silver and some good food like potatoes. And then they're also going to take over the Aztec in Central America and modern-day Mexico and find massive amounts of gold. So the Spanish are not just the first to explore and the first to colonize, they're also the first to find wealth in the New World. So they eventually came over and started to make permanent settlements and establish some very advanced civilizations that did have some cultural blending with the natives that they encountered, and eventually also with the African slaves that they would bring over. So the Spanish were making a lot of money. They were making a lot of money not just on the gold and silver that they were taking from the Inca and the Aztec, but also from mining more gold and silver, very labor intensive, and also from starting very large scale sugarcane plantations. People were just wild about sugar at this time in the world, much like we still are today. So the Spanish were making enormous profits in the New World in their colonies by mining gold and silver and by farming sugarcane. Now, the problem that they ran into is that they needed a labor source. The natives that they encountered were dying from European diseases. Europeans who came over didn't want to do the hard work of mining and harvesting the sugarcane themselves. So they knew that there was a slave trade in Africa, and they eventually turned to the African slave trade to meet their labor needs in the New World. And this is another first and an unfortunate one. And it's an example and it's a precedent that's going to be followed by other European colonizers in the New World. When you need a labor force, turn to African slaves. And this is something that the English colonists are going to do as well. So the Spanish are the trailblazers. They're the trendsetters. They're the first to explore. They're the first to colonize, the first to start gaining wealth, the first to start sugarcane plantations, and the first to use forced labor in the New World. And if the Spanish hadn't come over when they did, all of world history would be different. But of course, this is landmark moments in American history, so we want to focus more on the American side of things. So that brings us to Jamestown. Jamestown is going to be the first English colony in the New World, the first permanent. Some of you history buffs out there know about the lost colony of Roanoke Island. That one disappeared, right? Jamestown is going to be permanent and long-lasting. So Jamestown is first starts in 1607 when the first settlers come over, a little over 100, about 120 or so settlers come over to Jamestown, which is in Virginia today. They're there for profits. Jamestown is a proprietary colony, a for-profit colony. So they find an area to start their civilization. You can see this triangle shape here. This was the first fort that they made. And then eventually they expand out as the colony grows. Not the best location. They were really in a swamp, not very healthy. And that led to a lot of hardship. The first few years in Virginia and in Jamestown were very difficult, and a lot of it was because the settlers were really trying to figure out their identity. They were there for money. They were a proprietary colony. Jamestown was founded by the London Company of Virginia, and it was established to make money for its shareholders. It's what's called a joint stock company. So if you bought stock, you want to see the company make a profit. So as the settlers are there, they really struggled in the early days. They were just digging holes in the forest instead of worrying about food. In the first winter, about half of the settlers died. They called it the starving time because it was so miserable and because they just faced so many hardships. They eventually are going to get some help from Native Americans, and they're eventually going to figure out how to find food, and they're going to really find out too that there's no gold in this area, so they're going to stop digging and trying to look for that. But the first few years were tough. This guy down here is John Smith. He eventually led the settlers of Jamestown through those first few years. He had a motto that those who shall not work shall not eat. So that way he could get the colonists kind of whipped into shape so they could get through those early years. But then eventually this guy comes around. His name is John Rolfe. John Rolfe came over, and what he eventually decided and tried is that they should grow tobacco. So in 1612, under the leadership of John Rolfe, Virginia had their first tobacco harvest, and it went really well. Before you know it, they were able to grow tobacco, so they had found their source of profits, and tobacco is really going to become their identity. But much like the Spanish, as they're making these profits, eventually they're going to need a source of labor. And in 1619, the first slaves arrived in Jamestown. They were sailing under a Dutch ship, and somewhere around 20 slaves were sold to the settlers at Jamestown in 1619. So a year before Plymouth is even started, we have slaves in the colonies working in Jamestown, and the number of slaves is just going to grow over time. So Jamestown is establishing some important ideas for us about profit in the New World, about economics in the New World, and about labor. They're also showing us through those early struggles that hardship is going to be a common aspect of the colonial experience for the English as well. The other thing that was very important that the settlers of Jamestown helped establish, hide all of our pictures, is self-government. So in Jamestown, the colonists wanted to make their own rules. This is going to be a very common idea we're going to see throughout American history, that we want self-autonomy. We want our own government so we can make our own rules, and we want a government there that's going to be able to protect our rights. So in Virginia, at Jamestown, they established something called the House of Burgesses. And the House of Burgesses was their elected representative government. It started meeting in 1619. In that year, the colony of Jamestown had about 2,000 people in it, and the first meeting in the House of Burgesses had their royal governor, 6 royal officials, and 10 planters. So just 17 people representing 2,000 people or so in the colony, but they were there to represent them. And that's an important aspect of the representative democracy that we live in today, that we have a representative government. And eventually the House of Burgesses is going to grow and become more sophisticated and turn into a bicameral representative legislature, right? Bicameral means 2 house, just like our Congress today that has the House of Representatives and the Senate, and then the Legislative Assembly, a group of people that's going to make the laws. So the House of Burgesses laid the foundation for what will eventually become our Congress. And Jamestown and the settlers of Virginia laid down the foundation for representative government. So we see a lot of important things from Jamestown, whether it be representative government or the influence of agriculture and tobacco and profits, the influence of important individuals like Smith and Rolfe, the fact that it's going to be difficult to figure out how you're doing things in these colonies, but also the idea that, there's promise. There's a whole new world in the colonies and lots of things to come explore. So the second major colony is Plymouth. Plymouth is founded in 1620. Just so we can have a little bit of perspective here, here's a map. All right, so Plymouth is right around here. Today it's Cape Cod. All right, later on Plymouth will be engulfed by the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which will start Boston. Here's Jamestown down here in modern day Virginia. So that's just a little context of where they are and their relative location. Now, the settlers of Plymouth, they're going to be coming over for religious freedom. That's going to be their main goal, is not profits, but freedom and religious freedom. But even those who are coming over for religious freedom, what they do before they even set a single foot, set a single foot on shore in the New World, they drafted and signed something called the Mayflower Compact. Here you can see an artist rendition of what it may have looked like. The Mayflower Compact was like a miniature constitution. The Mayflower Compact, this miniature constitution, laid out what the government was going to look like for Plymouth and for the people who came over on the Mayflower. And it set up a representative government with an assembly that would protect people's rights and make the rules, just like the House of Burgesses did in Virginia. So this idea of self-government is a common one that we're going to continue to see, and something that the Mayflower Compact upheld. So it's a little mini constitution that's based on representation and self-government. So all the men signed it before they came ashore, saying we're going to make and follow our own rules, and we'll be able to read some of that later on in the unit this week. So very different from Jamestown, because they're here again for their religious freedom. They're going to eventually have to find a way to make profits too. That's going to come later. But their main goal is to come over and build a model religious city so that way they can practice their purified form of Protestantism. That's where the term Puritan comes from. So they're seeking an area where they can practice their religion freely, something that many other immigrants to the New World, to the colonies, to the United States of America will look for as well. They were big on independence in a lot of ways too, and religious freedom. Even the way they structured the Puritan church in Plymouth and Massachusetts was very independent. There was no bishops. There was no overarching kind of leader of the church. Instead, each congregation was given independence to practice their Puritan faith in the ways that they wanted to. You still had to be Puritan in Massachusetts, and that's why we're going to see some other colonies spring up, like Pennsylvania for the Quakers and Maryland for the Catholics, so that way everyone can find a place to practice their religious freedom. So there'll be some toleration, and it was made easy to have some religious toleration in the colonies because there was so much space for it. And just like Jamestown, the settlers of Plymouth, they went through some hardship as well. The natives in their area were more welcoming to them. Those natives had some experience with Europeans. They spoke the language a little bit. They were anxious to get on good terms because they had some violence between them and other European groups, other English groups. So they're going to find some good, relatively friendly local Native Americans to help them. But the settlers of Plymouth, just like the settlers of Jamestown, went through some hardship. But it's interesting, you typically hear, when you learn about early colonization in the United States, in colonial America, right, you learn about Plymouth and Jamestown, because they're a great representation of two different parts of American identity. The settlers of Jamestown are coming for profits and economic opportunity and self-government. The settlers of Plymouth are coming for religious opportunities, religious freedom, and self-government. So there's a lot of big American ideas there. So just to wrap it up a little bit, what we see in the colonial period, religion is going to be very important for the people that come over here. Freedom is going to be very important for the people that come over here in lots of different forms. Economics are going to be important as people try to figure out a way to make money so that way they can have a livelihood when they come to the New World. And government is going to be incredibly important. Well, we want rights. We want to have our rights as Englishmen. We want to have rights for all men that are here. We want representative governments, and we want to make our own rules. We, the people, want to be making our rules. We don't want to be told by our European monarchs, by the English king, what we're supposed to do. So the Spanish are the trailblazers, and then the settlers of Jamestown and Plymouth are showing us important ideas about religion, freedom, the economy, and government. So, as we look forward, you've watched your introductory video. Make sure that you take the quiz that follows this video and then participate in the discussion. You can find that stuff on our class page. Get that done today. Don't leave it off for another day. Wednesday-ish, you should go through and do your guided short answer document analysis questions that you can find on our class page. And then Friday or Saturday, you should take care of and complete the multiple choice question document analysis that you can find on our class page. If you have questions, make sure that you're letting me know. Remember that with these videos, you can pause them, you can rewatch them, you can go back and get the information again if you need it. So hopefully you have a good idea of the big picture here and the historical context of colonial America. So that way, as we go and start to analyze some of these documents, you can understand why this colonial period was so important and a landmark moment in American history. See ya!